Perfect.
How is it going, Bears fans? Welcome back to another episode of Beared Down Uncut, the show where we talk everything Bears completely uncut every day of the week. Today, in episode number 177 of Uncut, we're going to be discussing Odell Beckham Jr. He's the only marquee name left on the free agency market, and we're going to be discussing whether or not it makes sense for the Bears to at least engage in conversation with him. Obviously, OBJ, well known for his 2014-2015 one-handed snags with the New York Giants. It's been a whirlwind for him the last couple of years, but he did provide some good play for the Los Angeles Rams in the Super Bowl and could potentially come in and provide some good help to Justin Fields and co. in Chicago. Welcome back to the show, guys. Free agency on the docket today. Feels good to be back once again. Third video this week. If you haven't done so already, do us a favor, drop a like, subscribe, follow wherever you may be listening. We're putting out the most comprehensive Bears coverage on the web throughout the entirety of the 2022-2023 season. I am your host, Chris Maltby. Big day today. The Masters, Tiger Woods is back, opening day in baseball, but we are here talking football. I am joined by my co-host, Parth Shaw. Parth, how is it going on a big day of sports today?
Doing good. Just been watching a little bit of the Masters. Love watching Tiger play. He's been playing pretty good so far. And excited for opening day. The Cubs play today. I know you're hyped about that. And the White Sox, I think, start off tomorrow at Detroit. So that should be fun as well.
Yeah, huge week in sports. I mean, we started the week with March Madness. Even though they are playing terrible, it is still good to see the Bulls clinch a playoff spot. We've got opening week in baseball. We've got the Masters. We've got the NFL draft coming up later this month. So a pretty solid spot in sports right now with the NBA playoffs starting up here in about a week. But today we are here to talk some more NFL free agency. I think probably one of our first videos on free agency, and the entirety of it is practically over. But we're talking Odell Beckham Jr. today. So let's hop right into it. I mean, it's Odell. We're talking about OBJ today. One of the most iconic receivers in the league for his game-breaking speed and his catching ability ever since he came into the league in 2014. Obviously, spent last year with the Cleveland Browns, traded to the Los Angeles Rams. He had 2 catches for 52 yards in the Super Bowl before, I believe, tearing his ACL or some sort of bad injury. But Odell has been productive for quite some time. He hasn't really had an incredible year, since around 2019, but he is well known for his time with the Giants back in 2015, 2014. 1,450 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns came in his best year, his second season in the league. Obviously, then he went to Cleveland, where he had a decent year with Baker Mayfield. Obviously, those two definitely got chippy as the time there ended. But 2019, he had 1,035 yards and 4 touchdowns. He still has proven that he can be a productive player. He's gone through some injury struggles throughout the last couple of years, and Parth will discuss a little bit later down the road here whether or not he can still be productive in an NFL offense, especially if he is healthy. But overall, taking a look at the wide receiver market, most everyone's been signed, franchise tag, traded. We saw Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams get dished this offseason. It's been a wild offseason, but OBJ is one name that hasn't really had much dust knocked off of it. I know he recently engaged in conversations with the Patriots before they traded for Devontae Parker. Doesn't seem like the Rams want him back, as they signed former Bear Allen Robinson. So taking a look at the Bears situation right now, heading into a draft where they have 2 second-round picks, do you think it's worthwhile that the Bears potentially engage in conversations with Odell Beckham Jr.?
I'd say so. The Bears have a lot of other roster needs, and they could use those second-round picks for those other needs like cornerback and offensive line. And, bringing a guy like OBJ who's proven to be a successful wide receiver in the NFL. I thought last year with the Rams when he actually got traded and he started producing really well. He looked like he was healthy. He was into the game of football. There's times where OBJ, struggles with focus, can be a little bit of a distraction. But when he was on the Rams, things were going great, and he was a touchdown threat. He ended the year with 5 touchdowns, and he was a deep ball threat. And he complemented Cooper Kupp really well with his speed, with his hand, with his size, with his hand size. The way he catches the ball compared to other receivers that are his size, it's out of this world, especially his radius. And And OBJ is someone who's always, proved to do well. I feel like he wherever he goes, he's able to make a mark, even with the Browns, even though he had a couple bad years with them. His first year, he was incredible with over 1,000+ yards. Him and Baker had a pretty good chemistry going. So I feel like that's definitely possible here in Chicago, and I would definitely try to talk to him at least.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot of off the field antics with Beckham throughout the years, which worries me a little bit if you're the Bears and you're looking to potentially bring in a wide receiver one. And once again, we'll get into it in a moment, but I do think Odell could be someone who could come in and be a wide receiver one with the Bears. He's a very productive receiver, and he's good when he's healthy. You take a look at him with LA last year after getting traded from the Browns. He played 7 games, had 27 receptions for 305 yards and 5 touchdowns in the regular season, only continued to meld better with their offense in the playoffs. He had 21 receptions for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns in the playoffs, one of those being the opening touchdown in the Super Bowl. So I definitely think it's worthwhile that the Bears, why not give his people a call just to talk about the asking price? I don't think his price would be as expensive as if the Bears were going to try and sign someone like a Devontae Adams if he hit the free market this offseason. So the Bears, they have the most cap space heading into the 2023 season. Obviously, we're in 2022 now, but the one thing Chicago has is allocations to be able to go out there and get some players. We saw Ryan Poles really put his feet in the sand this offseason so far, not do much in terms of signing players. But I think calling up OBJ's people, seeing what his price is potentially a conversation worth having, because I do believe that he could come in and really be productive and help out Justin Fields. That's got to be the number one priority in Chicago this offseason as we move towards the draft. Parth, let's talk a little bit more about OBJ, specifically as the player. You'd assume Chicago would hopefully be able to work something out in terms of how the numbers go. But how well do you think he would fit in Chicago's offense, watching him as a player for the last 8 seasons? And do you think that he is still a productive player, or if I can put it in other terms, a wide receiver one in the NFL?
I would say so. I think when healthy, OBJ is definitely a wide receiver one, especially just because of how he always brings such the defense has to pay attention to him whenever he's on the field, just because of his groundbreaking speed, and they know his abilities, what he can do, and what he has done in the NFL. A lot of corners in the NFL respect him because of that. Jaylen Ramsey said he's a top 5 receiver, regardless of when he's playing or not. I think he would be a great fit for this offense, just because of his speed and the way he can complement Darnell Mooney. The Bears do not have wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1. I think you can put Mooney as a solid 2 right now, and I think OBJ is another solid 2 or 1, depending on the situation. And if he can come into Chicago, he would definitely, help Justin Fields out, because Fields doesn't have as many as targets as I personally would have hoped going into the draft. I thought the Bears could have done a little bit more in free agency to get another wide receiver. And OBJ is someone who would definitely, get rid of my worries at that position, because the Bears don't have much depth at that position right now. That's for sure.
Yeah, Chicago added some good pieces further down the depth chart in terms of wide receivers, adding Byron Pringle, who I think is actually going to be very good, as well as Equanimeous St. Brown. But, there's still a hole there at wide receiver 1 with Allen Robinson departing town. Are you going to be able to find a wide receiver 1 in the draft? Maybe.
Definitely not.
Maybe it's a situation like a Jamar Chase scenario where the Bears could absolutely hit the jackpot. But when you're looking for a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, in my opinion, you're looking for someone who can be a security blanket, who you can go to consistently, who can make big plays. And when I take a look at Odell Beckham Jr., I think he absolutely fits that bill. I think he would fit in perfectly in the Bears offense, give Darnell Mooney some more opportunities against cornerback 2s as well. And I really think Mooney is a top of the barrel wide receiver 2 in this league. Maybe he proves us wrong, because it's likely he enters the season as the Bears wide receiver 1. But I do think Darnell Mooney is a really solid piece that the Bears should keep around for a while. I would just like to see them get a marquee name next to him.
I agree.
Odell Beckham Jr. is someone who you could bring in, can make those plays for Justin Fields on all levels of the field, can make the difficult catches. The health is a little bit of concern. The attitude and the mental stuff going on off the field is also a little bit of concern, because obviously, a lot of publicity comes with signing a player like Odell Beckham Jr. But I most definitely think he's still productive. I think he was trending upwards towards the end of the 2021 season, as we saw with the Rams. I mean, I think he was on pace to be the Super Bowl MVP if it weren't for him going down with that ACL injury. So I do believe that Odell Beckham Jr. in the right position is a very good player in this league still. I think he's productive. I think he's a wide receiver one. I think he could most definitely step into a role like that in Chicago. So it should be interesting to see wherever he lands, because it's kind of been a little confusing why he hasn't been signed yet, seeing that he's one of the only good names out there left alongside maybe like a Will Fuller. But finally, let's get into, something we like to do on this show is be objective and be real and realistic in our takes. Obviously, we've seen the Bears approach to this offseason so far, and there aren't any rumors that the Bears are attached to OBJ by any means, but you would assume that every day his price only continues to get cheaper, that he doesn't get signed. So, Parth, I want to ask you, we've seen Ryan Poles continue to double down on his take that he wants to build this team through the draft and only make selective choices in free agency. So taking a look at Odell Beckham Jr. and his situation, with the Bears still having a hole at wide receiver one heading into the draft on April 28th, do you think there's any likelihood that something actually happens here with Odell Beckham?
I personally don't. I feel like Ryan Poles is sticking to his word and building through the draft. However, I think OBJ would be a great pickup as he brings some veteran leadership. And I just think it would help Fields out, because right now our offense is pretty young. I mean, Darnell Mooney's still really young. Fields is obviously coming into his second year. Montgomery, he's in his third or fourth year. So
yeah, Cole Kmet at tight end one.
Exactly. All these guys are, pretty young. I feel like OBJ would be a really good vet to bring into the locker room, even though he does have his off the field issues. Obviously, you don't want his dad to tweet about Fields and missing some throws either. So we got to keep that in check as well. But I think him and Fields would have a great connection, and those two would get along really well if we did make this move.
I think it almost seems like it makes too much sense to where it's leading me to believe that it probably won't happen.
Yeah, that's just the Bears thing. So
yeah, that might just be a Chicago team's thing outside of the Bulls last year, going and getting Nikola Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan. I don't think it's likely that anything actually happens, but I do think no harm, no foul. It makes sense for the Bears to at least reach out to Odell's people just to get his price and discuss the possibility of him coming to Chicago. As Parth mentioned, and I'll double down on it, I think he brings some great veteran leadership to the field. The off-the-field issues are a little bit worrisome, especially considering the culture that the Bears like to uphold. They've never really brought in any troubled players or players with drama issues. Or
ever since Martellus Bennett and O'Shawn Jeffrey, we've been done with that, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. But I do think it could be a really good scenario if the Bears brought him in. I think he would be the solidified wide receiver one. I'm not sure if he's going to be ready for the 2022 season, but when he is ready, I think he could have a very good connection with Justin Fields. They need to get that number one guy, whether it's this offseason or next offseason. Ryan Poles wants to build it through the draft. He wants to be selective, but you've got to get the pieces around Justin Fields to be able to succeed. This defense, at least for the most part, and I know the Bears defense is going to look a lot different in 2022, but the defense always comes to play to an extent. It seems like for quite some time, ever since people like Jay Cutler have been around, it's always the Bears offense is lacking, and some people say they're a quarterback away, but you got to give your quarterback help, whether that be building the offensive line, building the wide receiver corps. The Bears have a hole at wide receiver one, and I think Odell Beckham Jr. could most definitely fill that. So thank you guys so much for tuning into episode number 177 of Uncut. If you haven't already, do us a favor, drop a like, subscribe, follow wherever you may be listening. We're bringing you guys the most comprehensive Bears coverage throughout the entirety of the 2022 season leading up to this month's draft and much further beyond that. If you want more content from us, head over to our website, bearddown.com. If you'd like to find the podcast on Instagram or Twitter, you can find it on both platforms at Beared Down. It's a great way to keep up with us, see what we've got going on, and also see some sneak peeks of some special guests coming on the show. And finally, you can find the links to all of our personal social media pages down in the description for myself as well as my co-host Parth Shaw. It's another great way to interact with us. You can see our thoughts on all things Bears, the entirety of the National Football League, and all of Chicago and professional sports. Parth Shaw, I'm going to get off this podcast. keep watching the Masters. Got to keep an eye on Tiger Woods and a lot
Yep.
of other intriguing players this weekend down there at Augusta National. But any last words before we sign off here?
Yeah, I'm about to do the same. I'm excited to go back to watch the Masters. I think the baseball games start to kick off in a couple minutes too, so maybe turn that on as well. But yeah, just excited for all these sports coming back. And like you said, the Bulls are going to the playoffs. It doesn't matter how the season ends. Once they're in, it's a 0-0 series, so they can do anything. So.
Absolutely clean slate. And overall, I mean, I'm glad that they got to this point where they're in the playoffs. But as you mentioned, a good spot in sports right now. Football, not really much going on outside of the draft here coming
The
up
draft
soon.
is always fun, though, so I'm excited
But
for that.
yeah, and time flies. I mean, before we know it, we'll be back out there at training camp, I'm sure. So a lot to look forward to. We're bringing you guys consistent coverage. We are looking forward to it. It's been a pleasure to be your host, though. Once again, my name is Chris Maltby, and Bears fans, as always, do us a favor and stay safe and bear down. We'll see you in the next one.